My name's Susie New, and I'm talking about in this brief video the Herrmann whole brain thinking model. This is part one of a two-part video series, and the reason is because I want to stop and have some reflection just after the first part before looking at how we can apply this model in our workplace. So just some very, very big disclaimers. This is based wholly on the work of Ned Herrmann. Ned Herrmann was the manager of management education for General Electric in the 1970s. He developed the Herrmann brain dominance instrument. I am not at all HBDI certified, and I'm going to provide some references at the end in case you want to do some more research. I first came across this model at a leadership workshop that I attended many, many years ago, and it's something that has stuck with me over the last decade or so. So I still find it quite useful in some of my work. So as I said, the theory for this was developed in the 1970s, and it's based on the Herrmann brain dominance instrument, which is a survey that consists of 116 questions. People complete it, and then they get a very detailed assessment of what particular quadrant they belong in. And that's the basis of the model. The whole brain thinking model is based on 4 quadrants. You probably are aware of other similar frameworks or models, such as the Myers-Briggs type indicator. That's probably one of the better known ones, as well as the process communication model. Why I like this particular model is to me, it was very intuitive. There's only 4 quadrants. They were very easy to remember. And I found it was also very useful and practical. I'm not saying that the others aren't. And obviously, we're all wired differently, which is why we're here. But I hope that you find this as simple and practical as I did. When I first learned about this, it was a half-day workshop. So as I said, this is a very brief introduction to it. But within that workshop, I found that within 5 minutes, most of us had figured out what particular quadrant we belonged into. Some of the uses for this model is self-awareness. So this is where we are today. I'm a big believer that you need to know yourself if you're going to manage or lead others. I think there's a really well-known course out of Harvard. I think it's called Milo or something like that. Manage yourself to lead others. You have to be able to know yourself to be able to manage yourself in order to lead other people. The next video, we're going to go into the collaboration and the communication applications of this framework. And then there's also, when I look at the website, a lot of work that they do is with organizations and looking at cultural intelligence and applying this on an organizational level. For me, it has had real world implications. I use this model when, for example, I'm preparing a presentation to give, although perhaps not quite this one, as well as if I'm thinking about who is in my team, how to create and build a team that is effective, and also to be able to deliver on projects. So this is the nuts and bolts of the model. There are 4 quadrants, and they are also color-coded. So starting at the top left and moving around. The first one is the analytical thinker. So we're looking there at someone who is logical, analytical, they're fact-based, they like to be quantitative. Moving on to the green quadrant, that's someone who's a practical thinker. So they're organized, they think sequentially, they tend to like details, and they're good at planning. And then in the red, there's the relational thinker. They're big on their interpersonal skills. They are feeling-based, they might be a bit more touchy-feely and can be emotional. And then in the yellow quadrant is the experimental thinker, someone who's holistic, thinks big picture, a bit of a gut feeling, sometimes intuitive. They can integrate and synthesize information. Sometimes they might pull a concept from somewhere and you'll be thinking, oh, where did that come from? Now, like all of these models, no one, I think, sits 100% in one quadrant. And you probably can identify all of those in yourself. And I think that some of the work, when I look at the website, that the qualified instructors and coaches do is they actually might work with you to develop a quadrant where you're not so strong in your characteristics. But maybe at this point, you're starting to get a sense of which quadrant is your dominant one, the one that you identify with, the one that you can see relates to how you think about the world. To go into it in a bit more detail, so the analytical person, they like quantified information. How much will something cost? What are the time implications of this? They like to be logical. They can be a bit critical, perhaps even a bit harsh, blunt. They're very realistic. This project's not going to deliver on time until it does this. They like numbers. From that, they might know a bit about money. and they like to know how things work. They like the facts, the knowledge behind something that is happening. The practical person likes to get things done. So they're good at establishing procedures, the processes for getting things done. Because of that, they can also take preventive action. They're reliable, they're organized, timely, things get delivered on deadline, they're neat, they like to plan things. The relational person, they're sensitive, they're an empathic person, they like to teach, they might be a bit, as I said, touchy-feely, they tend to be supportive, expressive, emotional, they can talk a lot, but they can make people feel at ease as well. And the experimental person has a kind of imaginative thinker. They can pull facts, they can infer, they make second guesses about things, they can speculate, they can be a bit of a risk taker, a rule breaker, a bit impatient, a bit impetuous. They do like surprises, and they can be curious and playful. I'm hoping this is building a picture of that dominant thinking model, and maybe one of these is speaking to you a bit more. Moving on to how this might look in your workplace. And this is built for someone who's working in an office. And we're going to look at, how this type of person might dress and what their body language might be. So looking at the analytical person, their office can be very business-like. They'd have some artwork or some fixtures, which are all very appropriate for their professional environment. It has this look of efficiency, which is consistent with the industry that they work in. Their desktop might be sparse, very orderly, very clean. And the way that they dress is very formal. These are the people who might come to work in that business environment in a suit and tie. Doesn't necessarily apply for anesthesia. When you talk with them, they might have little head movements, little body movement. They can be sort of a bit stiff, formal, and they have a very business-like attitude. The practical person still retains that traditional look and feel in their office. There's no impractical or unnecessary items. There's a neat, orderly, organized sense to it all. Their desktop is also very clean, very sparse, very orderly. And they too might dress quite conservatively, but perhaps not as formally as an analytical person. They tend to be neat, conservative, have a sort of classic look about them. When you speak with them, no extreme facial expressions. Arms might be sort of folded by the side, listening to you. A relational person, on the other hand, has a very friendly, comfortable office. There's photos of people, awards, prizes on the walls. It's a very inviting kind of space. Their actual desktop might be full of personal memorabilia. There might be a picture of their pet or their children or their family, multiple pictures. And they tend to dress very comfortably, loose, it's informal, maybe quite a bit of jewelry. They tend to nod their head a lot when you're talking with them, and they give you lots of eye contact, very warm. And the experimental person, their office or workplace might be full of color, lots of original art, very decorative features, but yet very aesthetically pleasing. These people tend to be a little bit artistic as well. Their personal desk space is often cluttered. There's lots of things going on, piles of papers here and there, the latest gadget they're working with or tinkering on. They tend to dress in a very sort of independent way. They look very sporty. And when you talk with them, they can look distracted. You might wonder, are they listening to you? And, they might be sketching, doodling, taking notes, that sort of thing. So I hope that has built a little idea of those 4 quadrants. I hope you started to feel like you might identify. As I said, when I did this workshop, it was a leadership workshop. I think within 5 minutes, everyone had picked which quadrant they identified most strongly with. So now I want to lead us into a bit of a reflective exercise, some homework, if you like, for us to take away and for us to then come back and discuss when we meet for our online session. So following the format of the quadrant, starting up in the top left, I really want you to have a think about which quadrant do you most identify with. So remember, that's the blue analyticals, the green practicals, the red relational people, or the yellow experimental thinkers. If you're not really sure, if you think that you're sitting 50-50 within 2 groups, then just try one on. Just see what it's like to be that sort of person, be a yellow or a red or whichever, and see if you can notice it in yourself if that really is resonating with you, and then perhaps try the other one on and see which one resonates with you more. Once you've got some idea of which quadrant you might fit into, I want you to look at your colleagues, particularly in your workplace. Doesn't necessarily mean the department, the anesthetists in your department, but perhaps look at some of the surgeons that you work with, or even some of your hospital managers. See if you can identify what quadrants they might belong in. As I said, no hard and fast rules. People can be flexible, but see if you can. And then if you can then take that a step further. So hopefully by now we're all starting to think about our leadership goals, where we want to take our work within WELI. And I want you to look at your project and think, who would you like if you were to build a team? What quadrant of people would you like to be on your team? When you look at your leadership team, maybe think about the leadership team in your hospitals. Who, for example, of these quadrants do you want as your project manager, your financial, who in your C-suite, your CFO, your CEOs, your HR manager? Do any of those quadrants speak to a particular role in the hospital or in any other organization? And then finally, certainly not compulsory, is if you have time, look at some of the resources. I'd be curious to know what you think about them. I've got them on the next slide. So only two references, one big, one small. The first one is the herrmann.com.au, the official website of the Herrmann Brain Institute in Australia. They have a lot of resources on there. There's webinars, there's blogs, there's videos, there's all sorts of things. If this really speaks to you, or you're still confused, or you just have time and you're curious, then please jump in and have a look. There's a lot there. I certainly don't expect everyone to have watched everything. So I'd be just really curious if you do come across something and maybe want to share it with the group when we meet. And then the second reference there is for a YouTube video. It's really short. It's 3 minutes. And it again just explains the quadrants with some different words, some different concepts that I haven't repeated here, because I know you can go watch that video. Just in case you're still not quite sure which quadrant you might be in, or you just want to get a bit of a sense for some of the other features in the quadrants. As I said, I'll be looking in part 2 how we can use this for communication and collaboration. But the first thing I want us to do is to look at ourselves and see how this model sits with us, see if we can find what quadrant we might belong in. All right. Thanks for watching.